right. Thank you, Tony. Okay, so now let's move on to our panel discussion with an incredible lineup of speakers sharing unique perspectives on leveraging Egypt as a gateway to Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, introducing our esteemed panelists, Ahmed Zaini, CEO and co-founder at Foodix, Endeavor entrepreneur. If we can ask you to win اسمك, if we may, thank you. Amr Shadi, CEO at Tribal Credit, also an Endeavor entrepreneur and Endeavor Egypt chairman. Marwan Inawi, co-founder and CEO at D-Squares and Endeavor entrepreneur as well. And Shireen Shohdi, head of Egypt and coverage director North Africa at British International Investment, BII. And our panel moderator, Mr. Hisham Al-Khazindar, co-founder and managing director at Qal'a Holding, Endeavor Egypt board member. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening, Endeavor community, friends, guests. It's such a pleasure to be here with this distinguished group of panelists. One thing I want to flag at the outset, we have one chair left for a sixth panelist who was supposed to join us, Dr. Hossein Heba, the head of GAFI, the General Authority for Investments and Free Zones in Egypt. We're saving him the space. He's stuck in famed Cairo traffic, which has improved with all our bridges, but is still challenging. We hope he can join us before the end of this panel. There's going to be a couple of rules for this panel. Yeah. I've asked the panelists not to prepare any PowerPoint presentations. So there's no PowerPoints. And there is no promoting our own businesses. We're not here to talk about ourselves. We're really here to talk, to share experiences, lessons learned around scaling, around international expansion, particularly when it comes to expanding outside of Egypt and into parts of Africa. But frankly, it's not going to be exclusively about that. We're going to talk about scaling up, expanding internationally, territorially, in general. I'm going to start, we're going to make this, we've got 45 minutes. We're going to leave 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. And this is intended to be an interactive panel. I'm going to address questions to the panelists, but to the extent another panelist wants to add a perspective, intervene, please give me a sign and do so immediately. And Marwan, I'll start throwing it at you, Badiznik. So, you're the co-founder, CEO of D-Squares. D-Squares is a company based in Egypt, but one that has expanded internationally outside of Egypt. What has your experience been? What are the lessons learned from D-Squares experience when it comes to scaling up, not just within your core geography, but also around Africa and internationally?
Happy to be here today. Actually, I believe that D-Squares is a good example for the topic today and for entrepreneurs who want to start their business in Egypt as a gateway to Africa. We started D-Squares like 10 years ago. It was a small startup, self-funded. What we do is we develop and manage loyalty programs for enterprises across Middle East and Africa. We do the end-to-end solution for these enterprises. We started in Egypt. Actually, it was a very good market to start with. We learned a lot from starting in Egypt. You can hire very good resources, the right talents, with very reasonable prices and salaries. And this helped us a lot to build our product in Egypt, to build our network of merchants, our client base. And we learned here in Egypt, and this helped a lot when we expanded into tougher markets. So our first international market was actually Jordan. And then we expanded into UAE, KSA, Africa, like Tanzania and Kenya and other countries, the starting point in Egypt was much easier than the starting point in Africa, for example. Like other countries like Kenya and Tanzania, where you need to understand exactly the dynamics and the behavior of the market. I'll give you a very quick example of understanding the differences between the countries. So one of the campaigns we run is like you tell the customers, our B2B customers, when you pay with your card or mobile and so on, pay X and get Y. So we usually work with merchants across the region, GCC, like the big brands like KFC, McDonald's, and so on.
Yeah.
So when we went to Africa, we used the same methodology. So we have our great relationship with like the KFC, for example. So we had the first big campaign, when you activate your line, you get your free meal from KFC, or big discount. When we do that in Egypt and other countries in GCC, we usually get like 100 to 150,000 transactions a month. So we've launched this campaign in Tanzania, and we were waiting for the big success. And we found out that we got 17 transactions.
17, 1
Yes.
7. Wow.
So it was a big failure. And we found out that KFC is one of the very premium brands in Tanzania. It's not like a
It's
QSR.
perceived differently.
It's a huge difference. So people go to KFC like every 3 months with the family when they want to spend a lot. So it's a high
special
end,
occasion, yeah.
It's a high-end brand. So we've learned that you need really to customize your solution, your offering, the value you're giving. You need to have like a local team in each country in order to be able to serve the customers in each country. So in a nutshell, definitely we'll talk more about that, but and we'll be very happy to talk with the entrepreneurs who are willing to start in Egypt to expand into Africa. It is the right place to start. You have the right talent if you have a good product. Even if you don't have the right, like the very senior connections and big funds, you can do business here and then expand into more countries.
Thank you, Marwan. I want to contrast this with your experience because you've in tribal, you're in Egypt, you're in parts of the GCC, you're in parts of Latin America, but so far at least not in other African markets outside of Egypt. Why not? Well, I know in previous roles, wearing previous hats, you had done a lot of Africa expansions. What's مش معنى يعني why the contrast with Marwan's experience?
Yeah. So for us, my previous startup, Tia Telecom, which is still running, we had operations in Nigeria and Uganda and Morocco and South Africa and Kenya. And what we were able to do back then is 3 things. First is leverage global brands, 2, leverage talent, and 3, leverage Egypt Air. And I'll just double click on each of those super quick. Leveraging global brands, for us, working with some of the top brands in Egypt was an easy gateway for us to go and target the same brands and same companies in other parts of Africa. So that went well for us and worked to our advantage. Number 2 is talent in general. We had very hungry talent, especially in the IT sector back in the day, and we were able to leverage that, which was talent that was a little bit more scarce in other parts of Africa, and this was maybe 10 to 15 years back. We also noticed something, that talent from Egypt was sort of neutral. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but 5-10 years ago, you would have these sensitivities between cultures. If you're in someone from Ghana doing work in Nigeria or Kenya doing work in Tanzania, you would find there could be potential these sensitivities. And what we had back then was a very engaged, very hungry team in Egypt that was able to go locally and hire locally with a lot more ease and connect quite well with different markets. The third one, which I never really realized was an advantage until we started operating in tribal in LATAM, is actually Egypt Air, and your ability to have direct flights to all of these countries is a big advantage. And we noticed this pain at tribal in the US, being based out of San Francisco and trying to operate in LATAM. I mean, the only flight that we had direct was to Mexico. And when you look at companies that are doing work in LATAM, they end up being based in Miami. If you want to do work in LATAM and you're based out of the US, you really didn't have a lot of options to be based. It's going to be Miami because this is where direct flights are. And I realized this advantage operating in the US, trying to target a large market like LATAM. So these three things work to our favor. Now, the reason why I bring them up is because Africa is super diverse. Culturally, it's diverse. Regulations, in our case, is very diverse. The legal setups are going to be very diverse. And for us to replicate the success that we had with TA Telecom and leveraging all of these things was not possible. So for us, it's been a very careful journey to expand very slowly in African markets and taking them one by one. And again, Egypt being one of these core markets for us today that we can potentially leverage moving forward.
Thanks, Amr. Moving on to the third entrepreneur on this panel, Ahmed. So you're from Saudi originally.
Yes.
You operate in Saudi, UAE, Kuwait, Egypt has become a big market, and you guys operate internationally. But home, I suspect, is more GCC. From your perspective, from Foodix experience, how do you view Egypt? How do you view international expansion as it relates to Egypt? I'll come back on to you with some general questions around lessons around scaling up, but let's start with that, بعد إذنك.
So actually, last year, we celebrated that 50% of our total, let's say, revenue in the stores comes from outside Saudi. So from the 9 years operation in Foodix, starting from Riyadh, Khubar and Riyadh and Dubai, we successfully win the expansion equation because it was really a big debate and challenge in the region to expand your penetration in the local market here. So I think Egypt market today is becoming a second home, by the way, because the remarkable numbers that we have and penetration we have accomplished last year was really remarkable. Given said in our business model, we need to operate when we enter a market, we need to enter and close the whole, our three flywheels. We have three flywheels. We have to close all of the experience.
What do you mean three flywheels?
So we have the customer experience, and we have the, which is the merchant experience, because we...
You're a B2B.
B2B business, B2B SaaS. By the way, Foodix is a restaurant management platform and a payment processing company. So we are certified by the central bank in the region. So in Riyadh and also in UAE and in Egypt, we are working with central bank, Bank of Misr, and a fintech company. So in order to expand in a market, we have to lock the whole flywheel. We have the merchant experience and the employee experience in the sector, and we have the consumer experience. So in order to bring the demand and the whole experience in the same stores. So Egypt, for example, it took us, since we started licensing and having the certification in order to incorporate in the market, it's 2020, post-COVID for sure. So today we are really seeing the fruits of being all of the operations and the hustle we have been
But
through.
it took a while to get started.
Definitely, yes. Ecosystem wasn't mature like in the Gulf area as well. So I think Amr and Marwan, I think that you guys are more expert than me in terms of the market. So you've been together when we founded the company in 2014. There is nothing called entrepreneur, or even nothing called even VC. We cannot find single venture capitalists that they really or even legal or law, local law lawyer to accept and understand this language. And maybe you guys can validate that. So today, we are lucky that we are
Things have come a long way.
of course, and also we have the support from the government. So we are seeing that there is a vision, that we have common vision in Egypt and Saudi Arabia 2030, that digitalizing the whole infrastructure and all of the e-signatures and all of the plans we have. So a huge fast forward that all of the expansion story becomes much, I don't need to say easy, because if there is any investor here catch me to say easy, no, it's definitely not easy.
Nothing's
It's
easy.
A lot of operation to succeed in that domain, definitely.
I have to tell you, yani, given that I think we're seeing so many Egyptian companies expand to Saudi, and every Egyptian company I know right now is looking to expand to Saudi. It's very heartwarming to see such a successful, you know, Saudi start, you know, what was a startup and grew into a larger business, expand into Egypt. I want to turn it. We've heard entrepreneurs' perspectives. Shireen, I want to turn it to you. Okay, so you know you're an investor. You lead BII's British International Investment, which used to be CDC. So you're an investor and also a development investor. Having heard these experiences, and you cover, you know, the institution that you're part of historically has been very active across Africa. If anything, probably Egypt came later compared to other parts of Africa. I would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Hashim. I'm not sure. Is this working? Yes. So yeah. So as you mentioned, I think British International Investments has been, our core market has always been Africa, right? So we've been operating in it for like the past 75 years. And as you correctly stated, I think Egypt kind of came in towards the very end. I mean, relative to other markets. But believe it or not, Egypt is our largest exposure across the entire African continent today. And from Egypt, there's also kind of the cover for the regional side of North Africa, right? I think being an impact investor and being someone who's looking at different markets just in North Africa and even across my colleagues who kind of look across the wider African continent, we kind of tend to find there are a lot of similarities. And one of the impacts we try to do is try to support companies grow and expand beyond their local territories or beyond their local boundaries, right? So it is one of the things we try to do is how to build companies sustainably and take them from one market to the next. But I think the key question here is, what is the next?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that Amr has mentioned, and I think as Marwan has mentioned, his second market was Jordan. And if you think between Egypt and Jordan, there's a lot of similarities. And similarities is key, right? I think, again, Amr has mentioned it, it's what is the culture like? So you need to find a market that's very similar to where you're coming from. And that's why when you look at Egypt, a lot of the Egyptian companies, they're, besides the Saudi growth for sure, but when they think of regional expansion, the first go-to is Morocco. And the reason between Egypt and Morocco, although obviously the Moroccans speak more on French speaking, but there's a lot of similarities in the culture. There's a lot of similarities in how they behave. There's a lot of similarities in terms of how the market is kind of set up. Egypt is much bigger, but there's a lot of similarities. You look at the Moroccans, they like to expand more into West Francophone Africa, right? Yeah. So everybody has kind of a match. And if you can find the right match to take your next step, then basically there is a lot of growth that you can take along, but then there's a learning experience, like the KFC example, right? If you don't know the market, then you won't be able to take that growth with you. But given that, I think the other edge that we've also seen and what we think is a lot of value that we bring to some of the investments that we see is actually the failures. So a lot of the ideas we hear from investors, a lot of kind of markets that we think of why people want to go there, and we just have all the reasons why this is going to fail.
Yeah.
Right? It's not to demotivate anyone, but because we've seen it. We've seen how it works. We've seen the reasons of why it fails. And the failures in itself is a success story that people need to think about, right? So what can we learn from other people's mistakes and what can we avoid? Why does this market work and why it doesn't? And why people haven't succeeded and what can be done differently. If you can crack the formula, then I think the growth is absolutely inevitable. Egypt for sure is a gateway because if you look at the population, if you look at the size, I mean, it's the third largest population in Africa, right? After Nigeria and Ethiopia. So if you had to choose a starting point between, and you're not Nigerian, Ethiopian, or Egyptian, between these three countries, I would suspect Egypt would come first, right? It's just much bigger, there's a lot of demand, the growth, the diversity in the population, the gender, the underserved, the mobile penetration rates.
The
There's
depth
so
of the
much-
economy itself.
Exactly, so the economy itself has all the ingredients where you can do business. It's not a walk in the park, and it's not anywhere else around the world either. It's tough, it requires resilience, requires innovation. So again, all of that builds a lot of experience that really helps when you move into other markets.
Shireen, there's one point I want to build on, as part of what you said. Sometimes there is pressure for a startup to expand internationally very quickly, right? There's this idea that it makes for a sexier story to have more than one flag in one place. Sometimes even it's VCs that are pushing to expand. So Amr, Marwan, Ahmed, based on your experiences, what's the right time? What are the building blocks that need to have been put in place in one core market where you started in your organization? When is the right time to start thinking about that next market? And I want to bring it hatta before the decision point, Shireen, you're referring to, of which market to choose. There's the question of when do you start thinking, aslan, about expanding outside your original core market and turning this business that you're building into a regional or an international business? I'll leave it. I don't know who wants to take that first.
I mean, I'll just note it's kind of a two-step process, and I've actually learned through Endeavor. Endeavor has this great program, the Endeavor Harvard program for scale-ups, and we're lucky to be in like that very first cohort that was part of the program. And one of the biggest things as a scale-up program outcome of this program with Harvard was the market selection exercise. And the amount of like diligence that actually has to go through your market selection process was just very surprising for me. And we've seen like these cases through this program through Harvard's case study methodology, how companies that have done this process without a very deliberate market selection exercise versus ones that haven't versus ones that have, how big of a difference it has made.
Being rigorous makes a difference.
Extremely rigorous about what are the factors, how am I going to look at this next market, what am I considering, and just spending that time to understand that. And I've seen in our own investors how they actually value this output and they want to see the thought process for it. The second thing is, in my opinion, as part of that program, part of that exercise is repeatability in general. You've conquered a market, you've reached positive margins, or you've even broke even in that market. Is that a good point for you to draw the line and say, hey, can I just take all of these learnings and try to repeat those? And I'm talking as a person who has actually been through, have done all these mistakes. Where we went from a company at Tribal, and we do financial services. We had a global platform where we can service a lot of SMEs and startups globally. Yeah. We had customers in 25 plus countries. We had customers in 20 plus industries. We had startups, we had VC backed, we have non-VC backed. We had small micro, we had medium sized, we had early stage, we had growth. So we did not learn from this, to be honest, especially when the markets have been pushing hard, and your investors and your board are either clapping for you for planting these flags, or they're encouraging you to grow faster, like you mentioned. I think just being cognizant of understanding when am I going to pull that trigger, irrespective of what the board tells me, irrespective of what my investors tell me, and having kind of this market selection exercise with a playbook, a repeatable playbook in hand, will save you a lot of damage that honestly it took us a lot of time and a lot of money to undo.
Thank you. Ahmed, Marwan, anything you want to add?
I can share with you what we've done at D-Squares is we took this approach. So before we expanded into new markets, we made sure that we're ready for that. We're ready, we have the right people, the right product, we studied the market very well. So this was very important to be ready for the market. Maybe we are an Egyptian company, but we're not ready to work in Saudi Arabia, because Saudi is a very tough market. They have very high standards. It's not that easy as people think about it. So Saudi, for example, is one of the examples, because it's our second biggest market now. We made sure that we're ready for this market. And the second thing is that we said we have to go big. So if you go to another market, we have to start strong there. So we targeted the big accounts, like we started with Rashhi, STC, Saudi Tourism Authority, Riyadh Bank, like the PepsiCo, like the big brands.
Start with the bang.
Yeah, so our positioning in the market was totally different. It wasn't like the startup was coming from Egypt in order to get some market share, but we started like big in Saudi, and I think Ahmed did the same in Egypt.
Yeah.
So when Fodex started in Egypt, they started big. They weren't just like testing the market, because there is huge competition, big competition in the market. I believe this approach works well.
Yeah.
Ahmed.
So I agree a lot with what Amr and Marwan mentioned, and also I learned a lot from the Harvard scaling course that I had maybe 2 years ago or 3 years ago now. But I think what we did actually when we built our expansion strategy, and also this is part of the previous round we have raised, that we promised investors, and especially it was really a big round. So we promised them that we will unlock a new markets, and we have a bigger time in the market, and we believe so.
Yeah.
So before doing such, we built the internal system and processes, and also to automate and having a system of really forecasting and understanding every utilization of the product, and having the system and the governance and the teams in place. Our story of expanding in Egypt, for example, Egypt is the first option of when you see in any tourism or hospitality big market, because we really are interested to expand into a big market, and this is where we are looking and shopping around. Where is the second big market after KSA? And definitely Egypt is a market for that. We build. When we entered the market in Egypt, we actually tested the market in 2020. We have integrated with Egyptian startup companies. We have mingled with the community here, and we figure out that there is a lot of alikes between how we penetrated the market in the Saudi market. The good thing that there is two things in common between the Saudi market and Egypt market, as we are really a closed community market, especially if you are in a B2B business. So it's a word of mouth play a lot in reputations and building the brand awareness as well. And this is exactly what Marwan mentioned, that we really started big, and we invested around more than $2 million in the first start in the market. You have seen our billboard in the market. So we really have started really big in order to set our matrix, and luckily that we alhamdulillah having the fruits nowadays.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Dr. Hussam Heba.
Alhamdulillah على السلامة.
Alhamdulillah على السلامة, President of Gafi. يعني حضرتك will dive right in with you. احنا a number of the panelists have been من ناحية Ahmed was singing the praises of Egypt with their expansion from Saudi here. We've talked about Egyptian companies based in Egypt expanding outside of Egypt. حضرتك, do you want to comment on many of the people in this room either operate in Egypt, have started businesses in Egypt, or would look at starting businesses in Egypt. This is an audience that's done its homework to some extent. So my question to you would be, what is it that they don't know and that they should be aware of around new changes in the regulatory environment, new changes around formation of new companies? What are the challenges that in your mind you're looking to address for entrepreneurs in 2024 and beyond? Would love to hear from you around those questions.
Well, thank you very much, and I really apologize for my delay. And I keep apologizing every meeting I go for, unfortunately. First of all, I'd like to extend my gratitude for inviting me to this panel, to this event, and it's really a pleasure to always be within this ecosystem. I feel at home in my comfort zone.
Thank you.
Talking to normal people, thinking outside the box. What are we opting to? That's your question.
Yes.
And I think we should start from where are we now and what we want to go for and reach. Where are we now? We are in a very good position, actually. And if I look into the entrepreneurship startup system, going back in my memory, like 10, 15 years ago, there was nothing called startup at the time. I mean, I'm talking here about Egypt and even within the region, the whole region, with a little bit of touching on in the Emirates at the beginning of the internet city and so on, which really attracted more of tech companies and technology companies, software companies, rather than going for real startups as we're seeing it right now. So the ecosystem here actually started maybe late 2000s and early 2010 and 11. And I have personally seen the big boom after 2011, where everybody was really optimistic and unleashing the virtual chains that everybody was thinking about and so on. And it's had been growing ever since. And I remember at the time, there was nothing called regulation, nothing was there. And people or entrepreneurs were really were warriors at the time. I mean, they were really working in no ecosystem. So if we compare this 10, 15 years ago, then we can see a lot of development. Now we're talking about startups and we have this gathering, and I remember at the time only like 10, 15 people only working within this ecosystem. So
there's been a huge evolution.
It was. So we need to bear this in mind. I mean, without an ecosystem, there was an ecosystem. So what are we doing right now? We're trying to formalize this ecosystem somehow. And I think we have all the ingredients to do that. We have the youth, the entrepreneurs, and I would call them youth regardless the age, okay? Because they are young in their thinking. I mean, it has nothing to do with the age. And we have the funding, be it local or foreign. And last year, Egypt received it was the highest in receiving FDIs for VCs. In Africa, I'm talking about. And we have the will of the government, and that's new. Now the government of Egypt and the state of Egypt at large, starting from the president himself downwards, they understand and they visualize the real importance of this ecosystem and how it really contributes to the economic growth of Egypt and putting Egypt in a completely different platform than it used to be. And the reason I'm saying this because I'm now in this arena, so I can see and feel that.
But you come from the private sector and
Yeah,
from the investment world, Aslan. So you come
last
with
year
that
I
background.
was in a different environment, and so what we're opting to do, now, we started actually almost 6 months ago. When we looked at the ecosystem and we had lots of discussions with several entrepreneurs and VC funds and so on, and all the stakeholders actually. And when we looked into the government themselves, the government body has different bodies inside the government that is serving this ecosystem. But when I talked with them as islands, there was no bridges between these bodies together. And when we started to look into this integrated picture, we found that the government of Egypt is actually supporting this ecosystem vigorously. I mean, we have lots of funds, we have lots of incubators, accelerators, enablers, but they are not really talking to each other. So the players in the ecosystem, they don't know the magnitude of how the government is supporting this ecosystem. So that was one observation. The second observation, there was no unified source of data or information that you can simply come in and get your information from one place.
Yeah.
So you have to work around and travel in different spectrums so that you get minimum type of information. So it's a kind of an impediment to the development of this ecosystem. Thirdly, we have resources, we have assets that can be utilized, and they are completely underutilized. So the idea came on how we can...
When you say assets,
I'm
what do you
talking
have in
about
mind?
real estate, for example.
Okay, so things that could be used at office spaces, working spaces. Okay.
So we started to think how we can integrate all of this under one body that is not government, that's not going to control anybody, but just to give you information and guide you. So this is one. Two, we found out that any entrepreneur who's facing any issue, and by default, all these startups are disruptive. And by default, any traditional laws and regulations are not catering for any disruptive activity. So this transition of translating disruptive into regulation, we don't have the body to do that. With the exception of the Central Bank of Egypt, who started a little bit earlier to incubate its specific needs at this point. So we started working on that as well. Thirdly, anybody who wants, as an entrepreneur, who wants to have his idea passed through to either investigate or evaluate whether it's a good idea or not a good idea for the government to adopt or to incubate and change the laws for it, there is no mechanism for that. So when we looked into these things, we proposed to have a body that would cater for all of this. And in order to make sure that this body is really effective, we proposed to make it under the Prime Minister's office. Because under the Prime Minister, all the government is under him.
Coordinate with
yes, the coordination would be achieved. And once we proposed this actually to the Prime Minister, he immediately approved that.
Okay.
And he assigned Gafi to be the head of this unit with the membership of different stakeholders in the government.
But Gafi is the custodian of this unit.
Gafi is the manager of this unit. So we started to work on that, and we even take it further to the president, and he gave us his approval to that, and he even gave us the approval to utilize whatever you want and whatever support needed Just tell us and we will work on that. So we started with that, and we're currently, and the reason I was delayed, actually, I had this meeting with the unit that was an hour ago. And this is what we've done in this regard.
Fantastic.
Second thing, from our perspective, is that we have to look into the business environment at large, not just for the giving all the needed support to the entrepreneurs, but is the business environment inclusive and attractive for more startups and entrepreneurs to come to the light. And we started to identify what are the impediments that this business environment is facing, and we started to put a mechanism on how we can solve these issues immediately. Thirdly, we looked into the different legislations that are needed to make this business environment more conducive to the entrepreneurs. And we started working on all of these at the same time. We have made some good results, like forming this unit, establishing it, putting workflows, processes.
This unit, أسف على المقاطعة. This unit is active today.
Is active with processes, with responsibilities, with accountabilities, something that is the government themselves are really not used to see.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a preparatory work for the unit to operate. And we even worked on forming a platform, an electronic platform, whereby all the information to be disseminated through this platform. And we wanted to make this platform run by the startups, not by us. And we're currently developing this platform, and I think based on today's meeting, towards the end of the month, we will be launching the first phase of this platform. And we will ask all this community to participate with us to manage this platform. We don't want to manage it ourselves.
I'm sure you're going to have a lot of people knocking on your door based on that.
We even took the decision today when we were discussing the logo, the CI of this unit, and so on, and we decided to announce a competition among the ecosystem that they would create the logo for the unit, and we're not going to pay for it. But you're going to if you're the winner, you will have the full support of the unit on everything that you want to do with the government.
Is the name of the unit, the branding of it, finalized ولا لسه? How are you referring to it?
No, I'm going to offer it for you as an ecosystem to choose whatever name you want.
Fair enough.
And the unit name is really, really depressing. The official name is really depressing. It is called in Arabic وحدة دعم الشركات الناشئة ورواد الأعمال.
We need to do better than that.
In English, it is the unit for support unit for the entrepreneurs and startups. It's a very, very, very governmental name.
It is.
So that's why we decided not to choose the name and not to choose the logo and not to choose the branding, but rather give it to the ecosystem to participate. So we're engaging the ecosystem from this perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan.
From a legislation point of view, when we looked into the different requirements for any startup to be incorporated, they need quick incorporation, they need custom-made kind of legal form.
Flexible frameworks.
Flexible. Of course, shareholder agreements, all these issues. We started working on that with the with the regulatory bodies like the FRA and the central bank. And there are some legislations already in place in this respect. And we also managed and I have to say this with the support of the Prime Minister, the full support of the Prime Minister, to change some of our laws to accommodate for offshore activities to be done in Egypt.
Okay.
That's, I would freely say, this is a paradigm shift in the Egyptian state mind.
But I would say that people are not yet familiar enough with this development. I was not aware of it.
Yes.
Which I think
We
this
have
needs, people
changed-
need to understand more what
Yeah,
this
we have
implies.
changed the law of the free zones to account and approve the establishment of services under the private free zones.
It's very good.
We already have under the free zones, we have two types of free zones in Egypt. We have a public free zone and a private free zone.
مظبوط.
The public free zone, we have service companies. IT Works, for example, operates under the public free zone.
Okay.
But the new thing is that we are specifically giving free zones for certain areas, for certain building,
Okay. Okay.
whereby this building would be a complete free zone, and it will host startups to operate under this free zone. The only condition for this free zone for the startups is that the startup would be export-oriented.
Sure.
They would deliver their service outside Egypt, and we can allow up to 20% of the service to be inside Egypt.
That's a great development because historically, typically, free zones have been industrial parts of industrial areas, etc.
Yes.
It's really adapting the concept for export-oriented service providers, etc. It's not, and it doesn't have to be a huge zone. It can be a building or part of a building.
Yes.
Fantastic.
So this is one thing that we have managed to pass through. We also managed to work with the Ministry of Finance and the BISMIDA, which is the micro finance, small, medium-sized authority, to adjust some of the regulations to allow for the ease of liquidation, for example. So if I want as a startup to liquidate my company, now one of the impediments was we have to go through a very long process with the tax authority.
It's a very painful process.
Yes. Now the tax authority has issued a regulation that would take 90 days, a maximum of 90 days, to liquidate the company for startups.
That's excellent.
Can I add something to the government that I'm sorry to interrupt. So I want to add something that we at D-Squares have experienced with the government in Egypt, that the government now is more open to work with the startups and SMEs. So this was very difficult like years back. Now we're working with the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Education, Egypt Post, and they don't have any issues now to work like startup SMEs. And I think this is a huge opportunity for the startups in Egypt and startups coming to expand into Egypt, to work with the different government entities to provide their solutions, their services, because the government is now open for this. It's a huge market. They have big accounts, they have big budgets, and I think the government needs to work even more with the startups that come to Egypt and the startups that are already established in Egypt.
Fully agree. Thank you, Marwan, for highlighting that. Thank
I
you.
think I want to add to Marwan's comment. Yes, this is very true. And actually, today's meeting, we decided that we are going to put certain regulation for the government procurement process to allow for startups specifically. We have for SMEs, but for startups, it's a different story because startups, they don't have references. So, and the government always like to have references, letter of guarantees and
To
things
be
like
able
that.
to bid, to provide services
Yes, we
to
decided
government entities.
through the unit to put certain regulation, and we proposed to the government to apply this regulation to allow for startups to have part of the procurement requirements of the Egyptian government. And actually, this is an idea that came from a startup from Kuwait, and they wanted to apply this on the on Egypt Gulf governments.
Okay.
So any startups coming out of Gulf and Egypt are allowed to procure, to provide
governments
services
around
to
the
the
region.
governments of these countries.
It's a great
And
idea.
we're trying to formulate this somehow so that everybody would benefit from this. And this brings us to another step that we have done also through the government and through our counterparties in the different governments in the Gulf, whereby we rather complement each other in the startup arena. So we talked with lots of officials in Saudi, in UAE, and in Qatar, and recently with Oman.
To have better coordination, yani?
To have, yes, and we have a sort of co-investment schemes between our governments and allow the startups and VCs to come in as fundraisers to have complementarity of the startups between these countries and each other. And we have to identify the needs for each country, and then we start providing opportunities for both countries' startups to either JV or allow for them to work in other countries.
Very interesting, but not easy to implement.
It's not easy, but the will is there, and we're actually embarking on proposals now. We're building the proposals now. So there is a lot of work has been doing. We've been doing for the past 7 or 8 months, and we hope that it will realize to a better work environment and business environment.
Inshallah.
One last thing I want to add here with the Ministry of Finance and MISMIDA is that we are affecting the incentives under the law of MISMIDA 152, and there is a lot of incentives for startups and SMEs,
Okay.
including granting land for free, utilities for free, and so on. And we're putting the regulations for that right now. And we're also implementing the tax regime that the Ministry of Finance and the Tax Authority has issued almost 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And they're affecting it right now, whereby these companies or economic activities at large would be treated from a tax perspective at fixed rates rather than a percentage of your profit. So you only pay £1,000 per year as a tax. If your turnover from £1 up to £500,000, and from £500,001 until up to £1 million, you pay £1,500.
Flat rate, essentially,
It's a fixed amount that's paid as a tax to the government. So you're completely off the grid from the tax process, from auditing and so on, so that it would make it easier for the entity itself to work in a very easy way. Also, we've launched the e-incorporation of companies now at GAFI, and you can easily incorporate your company online.
To simplify the incorporation process.
Yes, and we also introduced the one-person company specifically for entrepreneurs.
Okay.
So if you're one individual who wants to open a company, he can simply do that, and the cost of incorporation is nothing. And I'm actually thinking of increasing it because it is really nothing. And you can do that easily, and we're promoting also the LLCs in Egypt because it is the same as any LLC all over the world.
It's fantastic.
So all of this is available now, and you can simply enjoy that immediately.
Thank you, Dr. Sam, for this very comprehensive and insightful overview. Yani clearly a lot of progress that's being done, and more to come, inshallah.
But this does not mean there is a lot of challenges, piles of challenges. I don't want to make it rosy.
No. There's always challenges. I think we have a few minutes left, and I wanted to make a chance to make sure that the audience has a chance to ask any questions that they want to address to any of the panelists or the panel in general. If we can open the floor for questions. There's a question over there.
Thank you. أول شيء يعطيكم العافية. Thank you so much for the panel. It has been very insightful. And the question to Amr, you touched upon market expansion and that you have a systematic way. But when we look at tribal, I don't know the sequence of your expansion, but you left a huge market that is very close to you, and you went to Latin America, which is shocking to most of us, right? And perhaps a market that I'm not sure, but I'm assuming you didn't know much about when you entered. So what's your advice on expanding when you do the formula and you get a market that is foreign to you and is very far away and perhaps you don't know much about? How do you make that decision to expand there, and how would you really, navigate your way through?
We actually leveraged Endeavor quite a bit to do market discovery. So when we started our process of this is tribal, this is what tribal does, we solve problems for startups in the early stage. We actually leveraged Endeavor. I leveraged the Endeavor network quite a bit to launch the product in the hands of multiple founders in different markets as an experiment, as a learning experiment. So we ended up from day one having tribal with entrepreneurs in Mexico and entrepreneurs in Egypt and Saudi Arabia and UAE and in Indonesia and other markets. And we quickly learned from this exercise, what does product market fit really look like? So we ended up.
Can I add another follow-up question to that?
Yeah.
You're a very highly regulated business like fintech. How did you really establish multiple pilots in multiple countries?
Yeah, so it's more about asking for forgiveness rather than permission. So we ended up really trying to leverage a global platform that allows us to issue cards in a certain structure that's with a legal opinion letter that says, this is something that's workable to just accelerate our testing of new markets. And then based on that, we ended up with this exercise that was a market selection exercise that said, what does open banking like in all of these markets? What does the regulation look like in all of these markets? And there are certain factors that made Mexico very attractive for us, both in terms of private investments, early stage investment size, the growth stage, and as you compare it to the Middle East, it wasn't the same. Open banking was way more advanced. The tax regulation and the access to tax information was way more advanced at that point. From a regulation perspective, B2B, if you're doing B2B financing and credit, it's not a regulated activity. You do have certain regulations. So we ended up doing this market selection exercise specifically and saying, it does sound crazy, but we have a product that works and we're going to go deeper, and we just went for it. Sometimes it pays to be naive as well.
Thank you. Other questions? There's a question in the back, I believe.
Thank you for your time. I'm Yazan Tadros, the founder of EduHacks. I have actually a question regarding expansion or selling outside. Is it much better done by hiring sales representatives or just selling by having local partners? And what's the differences and which stage shall be taken?
I can take this. So it depends on your business model, but I will go with, sorry? So B2B at tech. So I would go with a partner first, then go big in the market. If you really test the market, you go. Then why? Most important, especially in the B2B, you need to maintain the whole experience, and if especially after sales, because Definitely after that, it's organic leads and organic growth. So I really recommend doing both. We did, by the way, one of the markets we expanded to, we just went immediately hiring. So we did both. It depends on what is the market. And by the way, also, if you have a very similar, closer business that they have done it and win the market successfully, it's a validation. It's a pre-validation. We are, as an entrepreneur, we have to go and, do some risk as well. So this is one of the things that you can take in your assessment. Sorry? Yeah, partner is just the testing, let's say, window, let's say. But I definitely don't recommend to choose the partner as a sustainable solution for this, for a big market for you.
Thank you. It's almost 8 o'clock. I think we're over time. I think many are anxious to network and eat, etc. Allow me to thank the panelists, Dr. Hussein. Thank you so much for joining us and for all the insights. Shireen, Marwan, Amr, Ahmed. It was a pleasure having this discussion. Thank you everyone for your attention and for your questions.
Thank you for this super insightful discussion. So as we approach the end of the first day of DealMakers, we want to express our deepest gratitude to each and every one of you for joining us this year. And we look forward to having you in upcoming editions of DealMakers. Please join us for a networking reception at Bellona. It's on the same floor. The team will lead the way there. Thank you.